Hello, class, and welcome to Chapter 5, The Working Cell. It's good to see you guys here for this chapter. This chapter kind of goes hand in hand with Chapter 4, which talked about kind of the parts of the cell. So here we're going to learn a little bit more how the cell actually works. We'll go over the cellular structures a little bit more and then talk about what they do. And again, I'm using these kind of lecture PowerPoints to give you kind of a brief overview of the material that I'll be testing you on. I know this first module is 7 chapters, so it's a lot of information. So these lecture videos might appear shorter because I'm trying to get you to focus on the information kind of that I want you to focus on. And then please use those kind of chapter reading guides to help you study for this information. I'll kind of go off those chapter reading guides then based on what your test will be based on. So some basic energy concepts. Energy is defined as the capacity to cause change, and some forms of energy are used to perform work, such as moving an object against an opposing force. Kinetic energy is energy in motion, and potential energy is stored energy, energy that an object has because of its location or structure. Life depends on countless similar conversions of energy from one form to another. So for example, an object at rest, for example, if it's above ground, like my phone that's on my desk right now, it has potential energy because when it falls off the table, that potential energy will be changed into kinetic energy. Again, these animations are great, so download the PowerPoints and please watch those animations. So here we have some energy transformations during a dive. So the greatest potential energy is up above the water, turning into kinetic energy. The least potential energy is when that person is in the water, and then climbing up converts the kinetic energy to potential energy again. A physical principle known as the conservation of energy explains that it is not possible to destroy or create energy, but that energy can only be converted to one form or another. A few more key terms. Heat is a type of kinetic energy contained in the random motion of atoms and molecules, and all energy conversions generate some heat. Entropy is a measure of disorder or randomness in a system. So if as entropy increases in a system, that means the disorder or disorganization in that system is increasing. And again, a reminder that every time energy is converted from one form to another, entropy or disorder increases. Chemical energy. So the molecules of food, gasoline, and other fuels have a form of potential energy called chemical energy, which arises from the arrangements of atoms and can be released by a chemical reaction. These molecules release energy when their bonds are broken. So before their bonds are broken, those fuels have chemical energy. Living cells and automobile engines use the same basic processes to make the chemical energy stored in their fuels available for work. Gasoline uses combustion, taking gasoline and turning it into CO2 and water that powers the car. And in the cells, they go through cellular respiration, taking glucose and oxygen and turning it into ATP. Cellular respiration is the energy-releasing chemical breakdown of fuel molecules and the storage of that energy in a form the cell can use to perform work. Humans convert about 34% of our food energy to useful work, and the rest of the energy is released by the breakdown of fuel molecules, which generates body heat. A calorie, abbreviated CAL, is the amount of energy that can raise the temperature of 1 gram of water by 1 degree Celsius. Food calories are actually kilocalories, which are equal to 1,000 of those calories. And the energy of calories in food is used to fuel the activities of our life. So here are different types of food and the calories that they contain, and the amount of calories you can burn in 30 minutes doing these different activities. ATP and cellular work, so chemical energy released by the breakdown of organic molecules during cellular respiration is used to generate molecules of ATP, and ATP is a adenosine triphosphate which acts like an energy shuttle. It stores energy obtained from food and releases it later as needed. So here we have the power in ATP forms when you break those bonds of these phosphate groups. That gives off energy, and that's used to power a lot of processes. ATP energizes other molecules in cells by transferring phosphate groups to those molecules, and this energy helps the cells change shape, enables the transport of ions and other dissolved substances across the membranes, as well as driving the production of a cell's large molecules. So this is a little bit how ATP drives cellular work. The motor protein performing the mechanical work uses the ATP, the breakdown of it, to perform the power stroke. Transport proteins use ATP to transport molecules into and out of the cell, and chemical reactants perform chemical work and chemical reactions using ATP. The ATP cycle, cells expend ATP continuously, and cellular work spends ATP, which is then recycled when ADP and phosphate are combined, using energy released by cellular respiration. And up to 10 million ATPs are consumed and recycled each second in a working muscle cell. Enzymes. So metabolism is the total of all chemical reactions in an organism. Most metabolic reactions require the assistance of enzymes, which are proteins that speed up chemical reactions without being consumed by the reaction. And all living cells contain thousands of different enzymes, each promoting a different chemical reaction. Activation energy is the energy that must be invested to start a reaction by activating reactants and triggering a chemical reaction. Enzymes will enable metabolism to occur by reducing the amount of activation energy required to break the bonds of reactant molecules. So enzymes, what they do is they lower this activation energy barrier so that in the presence of an enzyme, it's easier for a reactant to get over that energy hump and turn into a product. All right. I'm going to kind of go over some of this. An enzyme is very selective. It recognizes a substrate with the active site, which specifically fits a substrate. And this interaction is called an induced fit mechanism. All right. And this is how the enzyme works with its active site connecting to the substrate. And then there's a catalyst, and then it completely dissociates, not changing anything in that chemical reaction. Enzyme inhibitors are actually substrate imposters that plug up an active site to bind to the enzyme and disrupt its function. So we can have different types of enzyme inhibitors that will get in the way of enzymes performing their work as well. Membrane function. So cells must also regulate the flow of materials into and out between their extracellular and intracellular environment. The plasma membrane consists of a double layer of fat, a phospholipid bilayer with embedded proteins. And we can see kind of what a membrane looks like with the different proteins, the phospholipid bilayer, and so forth. Diffusion across membranes. So we have passive processes, passive transport, whereas when molecules constantly vibrate and wander randomly into and out of the cells. Diffusion is the movement of molecules to spread out evenly into an available space, and passive transport is the diffusion of a substance across a membrane without the input of energy. In passive transport, a substance will diffuse down its concentration gradient from where the substance is more concentrated to where it is least concentrated. And its diffusion is much like pouring some milk into a cup of black coffee. You stir it around, and eventually those milk molecules diffuse to all parts of that cup of coffee, or dissolving some sugar in some water. That's just simple passive diffusion. Diffusion across membranes also occurs, and if it's assisted with a transport protein, we call that facilitated diffusion, where you have kind of a transport protein helping molecules go into and out of the cell across the membrane. Osmosis is the diffusion of water. So really simply put, osmosis is when water molecules diffuse across the membrane. The solute is the substance that is dissolved in a liquid, such as salt in salt water, and the resulting mixture is called a solution. And there's an animation about osmosis. Please watch these animations. I promise they will be helpful. Osmosis, we have a selectively permeable membrane, meaning some things can get through and others cannot. So water is able to get through, and the net movement of water always flows into an area that's more highly concentrated. That's called a hypertonic solution, as it tries to kind of make equal the concentrations on both sides of the selectively permeable membrane. A hypertonic solution has a higher concentration of solute. A hypotonic solution has a lower concentration of solute, and an isotonic solution has an equal concentration of solute. And this is when we compare a solution to another solution. The survival of a cell depends on its ability to balance water uptake and loss. And the control of water balance is called osmoregulation. And this occurs in our cells all the time, whether we're talking about plant cells or animal cells. Here we have an animal cell in an isotonic solution, where it's happy and the shape is maintained. If we put an animal cell in a hypotonic solution, water rushes into the cell, causing it to break apart or lyse. And if we put a cell into a hypertonic solution, water rushes out of the cell and it will shrivel up. Water balance in plant cells. Plant cells have very rigid walls and they are healthiest in a hypotonic environment with a net inflow of water, which expands their cell walls without bursting. And here we have plant turgor, where water will go into those cell walls to keep the plant upright. Active transport requires that a cell expend energy to move molecules across the membrane. Cellular energy, usually provided by ATP, is used to drive a transport protein that pumps a solute against the concentration gradient. Active transport allows cells to maintain internal concentrations of small solutes that differ from environmental concentrations. And here we have a look at active transport. It requires energy to move a solute across the cell membrane. Exocytosis is movement of materials out of the cytoplasm of a cell, and endocytosis is the cell taking in materials. For example, a process called phagocytosis, it means cell eating, is when the cell engulfs a particle and packages it within a food vacuole. And exocytosis is when that particles of food get expelled from the cell. And endocytosis, the cell takes in molecules. Phospholipids are a key ingredient to the membrane. They self-assemble into simple membranes. We can see in here, well, I guess we kind of stopped there, but phospholipids are the key component into those membranes. And I'll stop there and we'll see you for our next class.